So let's talk about winter break brilliance, the idea of homeschool in harmony, finding balance even in the holidays. So whether or not your family celebrates the holidays, winter is coming, the festivities are happening, you're going to see it, you're going to be impacted by it regardless of what your family does, right? So the reason I want to talk to you today is because I want to provide practical tips and strategies for home-centered, educated families to maintain a sense of balance and joy during this season. So homeschooling has the unique opportunities, but we also have some unique challenges that arise when combining the homeschool responsibilities with the excitement and busyness of the winter holidays approaching. So I just want to share a few tips with you because we're all busy. You probably don't have time for a lot of information, but I definitely wanted to hop on and just share a few tips. So the first thing I would say is manage expectations. And you'll hear me talk about that a lot because a lot of times our disappointment and our frustration comes from unrealistic expectations. So when you manage your expectations, you set realistic expectations. So maybe you have families coming over, and these tips are not just specific to holidays or winter break. It's specific to any kind of interruption, disruption, or change in your homeschool day. So whether it's a family member visiting during your regular day or time, whether it's the birth of a child or, the loss of a loved one, whatever it is, whenever there's a change to your established routine or schedule, things can be thrown off. And sometimes it takes a really long time to get back on track, right? Because habits take a while to be formed. So these tips you can use in any period. So like I was saying, managing expectations. You want to go ahead and set these realistic expectations so that you're not setting up yourself for disappointment or failure or frustration. In setting these realistic expectations, what you can do is think of the difference between a routine and a schedule. So when you have a schedule, you're pretty much laying out the times when things should happen. So at 9 a.m., you want to start school, then you want to take a break at 9:35 for probably 10 minutes, start again at 9:45, and do another topic or strand or subject or whatever you want to call it. This gives the idea of what happens in a certain order and at what time. Whereas a routine kind of throws away the time slots and just makes sure that it happens, usually within the same order, but at least by the end of the day or by a designated time. So maybe you should say, I just want to be done by lunchtime, or want to be done by 2 o'clock or 3 p.m. Whatever that looks like, the beauty is you get to decide. So the reason I'm suggesting that you lean in to the routine is because one, routines create structure, but when you don't attach a time to it, that's how you get the flexibility, right? So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. So I don't think that you have to start the same time every single day if something comes up, right? Like if you have something, whether it's a field trip or a visitor coming into town or an event that's just kind of throwing off your schedule, just make sure that you're following those things that are important to you. And that gets into my next point, which is creating core or non-negotiables. For some families, it may be every day, as long as you read the Bible, we read a book, and we do some math, I feel accomplished. For other families, it may be I want to do some devotion with a read aloud and then a history lesson. Another family may be more on the STEM side. So I want to make sure I get some science in and some math done. Other families homeschool with music, right? So whatever your non-negotiable is, whatever your core subjects are, whatever it is that's going to make you feel accomplished at the end of the day, I would suggest narrowing it down to that. So if ideally you do a few tracks or maybe a few days per week, you do history or geography or science, maybe on those days when things get thrown off, you say, here are the 3 things that I'm going to do. Here are the 5 subjects I'm going to do. So that kind of helps you to create the structure, the routine, but also the peace of mind and the harmony that the whole day wasn't derailed. You got something done, and you got something done that was actually important. Another thing I would say is lean into the flexibility of homeschooling. And the reason for that is because I think a lot of times we as parents need to de-school or unschool or whatever the term is to say we need to unlearn what the public education has taught us. Because a lot of us feel, me included, that learning happens at a desk, learning happens at a table, learning happens in a vacuum, learning happens when you send a worksheet out. And that's not the only way that learning happens. Now, is it easier to measure when you give a test or quiz? Absolutely. But we have to remember that learning takes place outside of these little boxes, right? And we need to get our kids out of these boxes. So, what does that look like? You have an interruption and you say, you know what? I could just put my kids in front of this video to watch their math class, or I could just give my kid this math book to do their worksheets or whatever they're supposed to do for their day, their allotted assignment. Or you could mix it up a little bit and say, if we're baking cookies, or if we are doing this recipe that calls for 2 cups of something, but we need to triple the recipe, how many cups would we need? Then you have that math working in real time, right? Then you get into fractions, you get into different mathematical concepts that are not just paper and pen. I think a lot of people have like washers and dryers, so people don't go to the laundromat as frequently. But think about like the interaction at the laundromat. You go and they say you need 13 quarters, right? So then you're asking a kid, well, how much money is that in dollars? Or the machine, they say, this dryer costs $4.50. How many quarters do I need? Or if I gave you a $10 bill and the machine costs $4.50, how much change am I going to get back, right? So that's math happening in real time and in a very practical way. So if there's a day when you can't do math, but the kids are running around with you, include them in what's happening. You're at the grocery store or you're at the bank or you're doing some kind of transaction that includes money or mathematics, include them in it. And that's a great way to include math in your everyday running around errands. As it relates to science, even back to the bacon, you can talk to them about the chemical reaction that happens when egg whites encounter powdered sugar, right? As you're making icing. All these different things can be taught without paper and pen, a book, a screen, a lesson. So really lean into the flexibility and just remember that learning does not always happen at a desk or table. The other thing I would say is remember to do meaningful things when you're teaching. So, granted, I can give my kid a paper with like 5 new vocabulary words and say, this is what this means. Here's an example, memorize them, right? We can have a meaningful conversation where I intentionally include one of those new vocabulary words or give them a scenario and said, based on our vocabulary list, what word would you use to describe that? So when you have those meaningful conversations and you're intentional about it, learning is happening more organic. And I think that helps to nail the experience a little bit more than just flipping through a paper like, oh, what do I have to learn? What are these words? Same thing with handwriting. Maybe you want to practice, you want your kids to practice handwriting. That could be writing down 3 things they're grateful for. For a younger kid, it may be TOYS. They put toys on the paper. It could be mom, dad, right? They have those smaller words that they can spell on their own. For an older kid, it may be writing a paragraph or a couple sentences on what they're grateful for, but they're practicing their handwriting. It could be them sending out cards, thank you cards to people, or just cards telling people how much they care about them. So again, handwriting doesn't always have to happen on a worksheet. It could be in everyday life because that's where we're doing this so that we can prepare them and equip them for the real world. So again, not just the worksheets, the head down and looking at the paper, but really the idea of bringing practical life into this home-centered education. Another thing I would say is really remember that learning is not just when we put on our teacher hat, but they're following us and they're modeling us and they're watching us. So as we start to get, whether we're getting frustrated or frantic or frazzled because of something happening, like, oh, people are coming over, I need to hurry and do this, right? That may be a situation where they're watching how we react or respond to something. Whereas if we're showing the calming, we're showing what harmony looks like and what it looks like to be at peace, even in the midst of things happening, whether expected or unexpected, planned or unplanned, then they can see, oh, I can be calm in the situation. Or, oh, if I'm proactive and I don't procrastinate, then I won't have to run around going to the grocery store at the last minute because I saw how my parents prepared to do that, right? So again, they are watching us, so let's model great behavior. We live in a Martha world, so I really implore you to seek after a merry heart, especially during the holidays, especially during the winter season. They are watching this. Let's focus on what matters. And the beauty of all of that is we get to define what matters. You get to define what matters. So, again, the three tips: manage your expectations by setting realistic goals, and lean into the flexibility of homeschooling by being creative with how you teach something and how you approach something, which also reminds us to kind of push away the schedule, but lean more to a routine, which flows into having those core non-negotiables that you want to make sure that you accomplish every day, or however many days you decide. Maybe it's 3 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever it is, but you get to decide that. And that's the beauty of it all. So I wish you peace and harmony and happiness and love during this winter season, for those of us who actually have snow, right? Um, for others of us who do not have a lot of seasonal changes, I wish you excitement and peace and all the beautiful things too. So, again, I know we don't have a lot of time because we're busy parents. So I just wanted to drop in and share those tips. Talk to you soon.